Hello, everybody. This is the Angel Dog speaking for a lot of the people out there. As you know, my prior podcasts that are doing things in society for all of us that are not necessarily recognized, which is kind of sad. Serving the community on the state, local, federal level, in the military, building roads, building bridges, working in schools, doing the right thing, hopefully. So tonight, I'm going to venture into the political arena. A little brave on my part there. And my guest is a former comrade of mine in my former government agency known as DEA. And my guest is John Seaman. And John comes to us by way of the left coast, we'll say, John, or the west coast. And I'm going to give you a little bio on him. We won't hold that against him. But John came on DEA. You have to look that up for some of you if you don't know what that is anymore. Believe it or not, there are narcotics that are still illegal these days. And from 1984 to 2005, correct, John?
That is correct.
Prior to that, you did 2 years with NIS, Naval Investigative Service.
Correct.
1982 to 1984. Prior to that, and you have to explain this one to me, John, 1981 to 82, Secret Service?
Yep.
What was that detail?
That was a protection detail. I was trying to get in the federal government, and they were hiring what they call protective service officers, which are supplement to the regular Secret Service details. And in California, we had 3 of the Reagans that lived out there at the time.
Is that?
Yeah, Marine Reagan, we had the daughter, and we had Michael, the son. And so I applied, got hired with them, and I was on the Michael Reagan detail.
And is it a plainclothes detail?
It was a plainclothes detail. Yeah, and basically we were supplement officers, so we were sworn, carried guns, had all the arrest authorities, everything else. The difference between them and us, we weren't agents, so we basically handled the compound, the security of the compound. We went on some of the details, but very rarely would we ever travel with the protectee, that kind of thing.
Okay.
On a thing.
And prior to 1981, John served with our beloved Marine Corps, 74 to 78. Am I correct?
That's correct. I had the last, Brian, I had the last Vietnamese officers in my basic school class.
Wow.
Yeah. When the war ended in April 75, they disappeared off the base.
So John, you must have served with a lot of Vietnam vets, I would imagine.
I did.
Around. Wow, that's something.
Yeah, we call it all my peer groups that are a few of us still going. We talk to each other. We were what we call the cleanup crew, because when Vietnam ended, we were the ones that had to clean up the mess, the drugs, the gangs, the racial stuff. They talk about problems today. The Marine Corps was a mess.
Wow, interesting. That's a podcast in itself. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Where were you stationed at, John?
I was stationed in Cherry Point, North Carolina.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I did. And then I went to Okinawa and I came back to Cherry Point.
Okinawa. My uncle was there in World War II. Did you do any reserve duty after that?
No. I ended my career and just went into private industry after that.
Well, my friend John, you've had a life of service. And then let's go take the audience. After your sworn DEA, you did some contract work. Now, explain to the audience, because there's a lot of people that don't understand that federal contract arena. Go ahead.
Yeah, after I retired around 2006, I got hired on by a company called MPRI, and they had a new concept where they were bringing in a ton of law enforcement professionals, and they had this concept where they'd meld them within military units and try to put the rule of law into the combat zone. And this was in Iraq. So I got assigned to a general staff out of Fallujah, and I spent almost a year there.
And what year was that? What year?
That was 2007. In fact, it was a year of the surge when they put a ton of troops in Iraq, and then they did the surge. And in 30 days, they took care of the Iraqi resistance.
So you were there in hot times, if I may say.
Yeah, it was a very hot time. You had, when I was there, every night you were having casualties from bombings or snipers or whatever. They were flying medical people in helicopters going 24 hours. It was a war zone.
That's something, John. That's something.
Yeah.
So what, explain to the audience, because I have your resume, but you have to explain to the audience what your detail, well, I always refer to it as a detail, but what was your assignment? What were you?
My assignment was I was a law enforcement advisor to one of the general staffs, and my job was to try to put together any kind of law enforcement programs, trying to put the Iraqi side of the fence together with the Marine Corps to see if we could make it work from that standpoint. Very difficult in a war zone. Very, very difficult.
So you're working right alongside whom? Who were
You're working? I was working right along with general staff officers, colonels, general, basically lieutenants, captains, majors, whatever units are available.
And were you doing investigative work?
Nope, not investigation, advisory.
Okay.
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 I'll give you a good example. What I did over there, one of my projects was I put together, the Iraqis were old time school. The U.S. wanted to move everything to computers and move fast and raise up the Iraqis on how to do computers and intelligence. However, in a lot of the cities and the towns and the villages, it's the old West. So, so I took a concept of, hey, instead of having computers and that, do simple things like let's put together photo albums, because the Iraqis in those areas know, they live in these villages. They know who comes in and out. They know who's a good guy,
right, sure,
a bad guy, whatever semblance of police or whatever, they know that. So we put together that kind of project,
tremendous sources of information, SOIs, CIs, right?
That's exactly right. So that was one of my highlights. I got that approved in the Marine Corps headquarters. They were funding it. And then I left about 30 days after the project got started.
Did you do any other foreign assignments after that, John?
Yes, I did. I got hired on by SIGAR, which is the Special Inspector General's Office for Afghan Reconstruction. I went over there 2010, 2011 period, assigned to Kandahar, and we were doing the reconstruction fraud there on base in Kandahar. Okay. And what I mean by reconstruction fraud, it's all the contracting. At the time, the past administration had a $50 billion program where they were trying to put $15 billion out of the system into the hands of the Afghans, which is almost impossible.
Okay, on that now, so that was 2010? 2010?
Yeah, 2010, 2011. Yeah.
So you were under the Obama administration, correct?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
So did that involve money laundering?
Pardon me?
Did that involve money laundering?
No, this had to do with the contracting, like the contracts that were given out to all these various companies to build roads project. What was happening over in Afghanistan is you had all this money going out to all these private companies, and they were hiring different people, getting different kind of goods and services in, and they have to meet the specs of U.S. contractors. The problem is a lot of them didn't. So a lot of the stuff that was getting built was substandard. Like we had a road, and I'll give you in Buldur, which is on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. They built a road with substandard road stuff, and people were getting killed as they were driving down. The road would sink. So you had people driving 90 miles an hour, hit a divot in the road, and that's the end of it. So you had that kind of stuff. And then you had the shabby construction on the bases where they would build buildings, and then after 2 or 3 years, the buildings would start bowing. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff you had.
John, I've never heard anybody expound on that. Those contractors, are we talking from all over the world, or are you talking U.S. contractors?
No, we're talking U.S. contractors, foreign contractors.
Okay.
They get contracts. They hire Afghan. They sublet them out to Afghan folks, and all that money gets paid out from the U.S. government. And the way they had it, here's how they had it set up over there. they had 6 what they call regional centers, okay, in Afghanistan, where you'd have all these accountants and all the money, and it would go through the military, these centers run by the military on that smart. The problem with the whole thing, the whole program was you didn't have enough what you call cores to go out and look at the projects when they were done. And you had all these officers signing off on these contracts that were built, the buildings that were built, roads that were getting done, and a lot of this stuff getting done that they weren't qualified to sign off on.
Mm.
And under US law, here's the bad part. Under US law, whoever signs off on that form is verifying that the work is done properly. So basically what I discovered when I was over there, we probably could have indicted most of the military officers over there signing off on this substandard work and caused a lot of problems. So I went to the IGs and I said, we got a major problem. And I also went to the head of the Corps of Engineers and he explained the situation. So we went and wrote all this stuff up, got the defense IG involved, and make a long story short, we were able to get the rules changed to streamline some of the processing on that, and also got it back to Congress so they were aware on some of these things, because you don't want to lock up military officers. They're just doing their job.
Well, John,
but the problem is the military didn't have the tremendous amount of money, and they were the ones that were handling all the funnel out for a majority of it, other than the USAI money. You didn't have the oversight that you needed on, and they didn't have the core, the amount of officers that were real cores, like electrical engineers signing off on the electrical.
Right.
You see what they didn't have that.
Well, that's amazing.
So, yeah, so we brought all that to their attention. Hopefully it was a lesson learned. Hopefully they learned it. That's what the job entailed.
Well, the reason I bring that up in depth is because your service there, let's call it your service, you were doing an investigation. If you were,
oh yeah,
you were putting together like we would a conspiracy or a CCE or something of that nature. You're putting it together. Only on the, what would that be on the civil? Would that be a little?
Well, they had Brian, they had
it could be
in Washington, D.C., they had the fraud task force run by, there was a U.S. attorney that was over it. So they had the capability to do indictments out of Afghanistan on people who were on ripping off. And that's where the indictments come in on people that were, ripping off contracts or stealing money or doing bribery or kickbacks. So that's what that was all for. And when I identified the problem, I contacted the head U.S. attorney directly and laid out the problem to him. I said, I said, under the law on this form that you sign off on, which is a federal form, it's the last form on a federal contract, whoever signs that off is under the threat of perjury that you're signing off that the work has been done and met all the specs. And now you see the problem. They're signing off on forms. The work and specs are done. So you could cause a major problem. So that was a red flag. And I understood what they were doing. So I didn't want to lock up military officers for doing their job. So I wanted to highlight it as a problem, let them solve it from that angle.
Okay, so this quite involved for folks who don't understand that. That's quite involved. John's familiar with, I'm not going to go in depth about it, but when you're running a task force in a DEA or FBI or ATF system and you're dealing with OCDEF money, and that sees money from bad guys or bad girls, whatever you want to say these days, right? And that money comes back and it's supposed to go back to the local agencies, your local community, and the money's not accounted for sometimes. That was always a big problem, but that you were doing it on a steroid scale. Okay, so after 2011, John, what did you do any more contract service?
Yes, I did. From 2012 almost to the end of 2013.
Okay.
I got picked up by DOJ. I was the senior advisor for anti-corruption.
Okay.
So I went over there and I was assigned to the country attaché for DOJ. And I worked under a couple of the attorneys there that were tied in with the Attorney General's office and the military prosecutors. And so it was a rule law program under I think it's OSA DEP or whatever they call it, OSA DEP.
And what
Which
is
is
the rule of law program? Explain that, please, for the audience.
Well, it's a rule of law program. You have DOJ had a program where they were training the prosecutors on how to prosecute, understanding laws. You had that whole function. You also had an anti-corruption program. That's where my function came in, identify potential cases for the Afghans to prosecute under Afghan law, that kind of thing.
So did you actually assist in getting a case to prosecution?
No, what I would do is I would look at the information. We had a few law enforcement agencies over there. We had DEA that was running the counter narcotic program with the British under the justice system, and with the U.S. and British prosecutors. That was the rule of law. That was the major rule of law part. We had the FBI that was training one of the investigative units there, and then you had the U.S. Marshal Service training their folks on the court system. So you had three major, and then you had remnants of the Treasury and remnants of other federal agencies out there. But as far as a big thing, was DEA was a major player of the whole thing.
Quite a background, audience, if I may say. Even though I served in the same agency, DEA, for a couple decades with John, we kind of went different paths a little bit, but quite involved, John. Quite a background. Anything else on that?
That was basically it. I did that for 2 years. One of the highlight points there in that program is I got approached in my last year. The director over in Afghanistan, they were working on trying to put together to see if they could do an indictment on the senior Taliban leadership. And basically, after 20 years in almost 20 years in Afghanistan, they had a ton of information and files and everything else. And what they saw that the drug traffickers and the Taliban were kind of one and the same. Mm-hmm. So the question was, is there a way before we leave Afghanistan, because they had put in that we were going to withdraw in 2014. So we had like a 2-year window to see if we could put something together and affect the senior Taliban, their terrorism and the drug trafficking. And so they came to me. My expertise was doing conspiracy cases. So my boss said, go ahead. And I did a case review for 6 months, went through every piece of DEA, case file information, informant files, all the intercepts. And what I did was I put that basically everything into a major pros memo of around 240 pages of 23 targets. And then I broke them out into separate sections. And that was almost 1,000 pages of evidentiary documents laid out, how the evidence, documentary, intercept, terrorism, drugs, all the overt acts into one thing. Submitted that to DOJ back in DC. DA took that pros memo, went to New York, met with the Southern District Criminal Division. They liked it. They accepted it as a case. They were starting a grand jury. And then what happened is that the
what's the year? What's the year that you did?
This is 2013, May.
13. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so in May of 2013, here you had the Southern District accept this major case. And what we had found out is the Taliban, basically, believe it or not, one of the founding members, a person by the name of Haji Norzai out of the Norzai family, was one of the original 4 members of the Taliban, and he was also a major drug trafficker. So they basically founded the Taliban and funded it back in around the late 1988 period. And then when the Taliban took over in the 90s, they had major meetings around 98 with all the major drug traffickers. The DA had major cases on individually, and they conspired with the leadership of the Taliban to do what? Traffic in drugs. So from that point on, in 1998, you have the original conspiratorial, what we call the conspiratorial agreement What was the agreement? 2 or more people. Here you had the Taliban senior leadership with the heads of the major Afghan drug trafficking organization conspire to do what? Sell drugs. The Taliban would give the protection, protect the routes. And then what happened over time, the Taliban basically took over and became running the drug trade.
Like the cartel.
That's like just like you do a comparison of what happened between the FARC and in Colombia. The same analogy fits between the Taliban and the FARC. Same thing. They were doing cocaine. These guys are doing opium, marijuana, and hashish. So there you get a pretty good deal. So from 1988 all the way up till current, you had all these overt acts. But here's the best part. In 2000, I believe 3 or 4, somewhere in there, they passed the 960 Act, which was the Money Laundering Terrorist Act, which really added an important tool for the U.S. because it gave U.S. law enforcement the capabilities to charge people involved in funding terrorist activities under the 960 rule. And it's one of the main crimes that we used against the FARC when we indicted all the FARC leadership in 2006, back in those days. So that was really the FARC indictment in 2006 was the first terrorism drug indictment ever in the U.S., where most of the heads of the FARC were indicted on that indictment. So we kind of took that information, used that. In fact, we got the copy of the indictments to see and compare the information we had on the Taliban on our side. What did they have when they indicted the FARC and everything? And we found out we had more information or evidentiary information than they had when they indicted it in 2006.
Wow. John.
So we knew we had the deal. Plus here's the nice thing that nobody really knows. As I'm going through their case files and I'm breaking this down individually on the major Afghan drug.
Who's they, John? I just got to interject for the
okay. The Afghan major trafficking guys would be like Haji
John. Oh, you don't have to give the name, but I mean, I'm saying, who's they?
Yeah, they would be the Afghan. The DA had major cases on the heads of each drug trafficking organization in Afghanistan.
That's what I'm talking.
So my job was to see is there a tie-in, an evidentiary tie-in that we can tie in those heads to the Taliban leadership under that conspiracy, and kind of make it a wheel conspiracy where the Taliban's in the middle, the leadership. The spokes are your individual Afghan organizations, the heads, and then your money launderers and there. So it'd be like a wheel conspiracy. And then you're tying them all together by the overt acts. Okay. You have overt acts where they're contact between A and B, or, Taliban is doing this for this group or that. Not all the Afghan groups we included in our case, because some of those groups were separate and didn't have any association with the Taliban leadership. So, but the major ones in Afghanistan did. So we had everything set up under this conspiracy case.
During that time, John, you're talking somewhere around 2006, right?
No, not that. Well, I'm talking about that was the FARC indictment. I'm talking about 2012, 2013.
Okay. Who was the AG? Who was the AG pulling on our side, pulling the strings?
The who?
Attorney General, U.S.
Oh, the Attorney General was Eric Holder. Okay,
so did I gather there was cooperation on?
No, it didn't go. It didn't. No, this stayed within DOJ. This stayed within Kabul. With Dave Sweatman, who was my boss, who was the country attaché for DOJ.
Okay,
and it stayed in DOJ with the deputy director.
Okay.
And then we went to New York and we contacted the head of the criminal division. Believe it or not, New York is one of those offices that have their own, most of your stuff comes out of DC. All the terrorism stuff is done out of that DC section. Well, New York has their own criminal side there that you can go directly to them. So they took it to them and they liked it and they appointed the guy who did the FARC indictment.
Hmm.
And what's kind of fun there is he read everything. And I had email correspondence between him and me. And he basically said, I read everything. You're right. It's going to be a challenge. But he said, I'm up for the challenge. And yes, this is worth doing.
Wow.
So we already, so think about this, Brian. We already had the hardest part, as you know, as an agent.
Mhm.
Ladies and gentlemen, the hard part with when you're putting cases together is to get a U.S. attorney or a prosecutor to prosecute the case.
Right.
Well, here we've got, it's kind of, we now have got the horse or the cart before the horse, because the prosecutors are the ones that sign on ahead of time to do it. So we already had crossed the I's and the T's, and the most important part was done. All that needed to be done now was a good 6 months to a year of all the follow-up work, because there was a lot of loose ends that needed to be done, investigated, put together, corroborate, tighten up the case, and tighten up the original process memo. The original process memo that I wrote was just a roadmap, just an outline roadmap. And what I did in all my subsequent target memos is I broke down all the investigative leads, kind of like an investigator for dummy. So the agent gets it. He's working this part of the case. All he's got to do is go to the one section, start crossing off all those leads.
Checklist, you got it.
And he's got his case put together, because I meticulously went through and took every bit of information that pertained to that particular target and broke it down, identified what document it came out of, the CS information, what intercepts they were on. And also we went back and had all the intercepts reevaluated once we picked. So we were already, we had a whole crew. We had Mike Marsack, who was the director there, assigned a group of about 10, 15 agents. And one of the agents had come from Colombia and was a co-case agent, just happens to be on the FARC indictment. So we had experienced people that knew what the goal and the vision was of the case. Okay. And a lot of the agents and IAs had never done one of these type cases. So it was a kind of an educational process for them too. And that was easy, because we would sit in a room, I'd give a brief and I'd walk them through and explain, here's what we got, here's where we're going, here's the end game, and here's how we're going to get there. And the best beautiful part about this case that had really good sex appeal, we had already 4 cases in New York, okay, people have been convicted on. 2 of them were major drug traffickers that fled out. One was Hajj Noorzai, the son of the dad, who was one of the founders. Okay, he got convicted in New York, I believe, in 2006 in New York on the terrorism charges. So we had all that base information already stating they're a terrorist organization. We had overt acts. We had a lot of evidence going that direction. We'd be able to use building the base case. You had all the stuff we pulled out of the files. And then we had active cooperating sources directly into the Taliban. So we would have been able to do a 2-part case, putting all the historical together, all the investigative leads, and then running active at the same time, active as you're putting a case together. So you got it all. It's kind of like how Giuliani did the New York mob kind of deal.
I worked on the Giuliani.
Same concept. So it was a perfect scenario to be able to do that.
John, I get the feeling, and this is a beautiful explanation, and for the audience, I don't know, we're trying to keep it basic, audience, so you can track on what some of the acronyms that John's using, but that is a complex investigation. I mean, that's hours upon hours of legwork and man work and just unbelievable tie-ins. Now, I get the feeling that the end of the story is not good. Of this story.
Well, the end of the story happened this way, Brian. It isn't good, because I ended up. let's just put it this way. When I went on home leave in June.
Okay.
And my boss was going to go back in July and brief DOJ at a major conference.
This is now what, John, 2013?
This is all 2013.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay. So in May of 2013,
Mhm.
Mike Marsack, Dave Sweatman, and McFarland, who was the ambassador for counter narcotics in Afghanistan. Afghanistan had 4 ambassadors. And there was another ambassador that was second in command named Kata now. And they went in to brief her and tell her, hey, New York accepted the case. And she went crazy on it.
Uh-oh.
She ordered them to stop the investigation, pull it back, and it was a real firestorm. This was all written up and documented by a renowned reporter in 2008 by Josh Myers. He wrote an 18-page article in the Political that documents all this. Everything I'm telling you was verified, how this all came together, what the purpose and what happened. So basically they killed the case. The reason the case was stopped by the Obama administration was because they, unbeknownst to us, they were in negotiation with the Taliban.
Wait a minute.
Because
whose day was in?
The Obama administration
Okay.
was wanted to negotiate peace talks with the Taliban.
Okay.
And they wanted, at that time, I believe Bird Dog was captured, and they wanted to get Bird Dog out. And Kerry came over and basically said, that's it. And the ones that made the decision, it's funny because Josh Myers went back and interviewed some National Security Council folks, and they said, yeah, we were well aware of what DEA was doing, and that case was never going to leave the launch.
Let me make some, how do I say this? For the audience, and for anybody else that's eventually going to listen to this, or watch it, because eventually, very shortly here, this is probably going to go nationwide. So this is all, audience, what we call open source information. Now, am I right, John?
That's correct. Everything I'm talking about is not classified.
Exactly. So everybody out there, don't go run into your local senator, your congressman, or whatever. Say, hey, these 2 retired Delta Echo Alpha agents are discussing things that are classified. It's all documented. If you go on the, what do I call Substack, John? What do I call that? Is that a media?
Yeah, you can just go on Substack, type my name in. It should bring it up. Yeah, and I also wrote a book on Afghanistan, on this whole thing on Bank on this. It's on Amazon. Been there. I self-published it in 2016.
Very good.
On the book, but
okay. And the title is
oh my God!
I should have checked that.
Yeah,
it's on Amazon under John Seaman, right?
Yeah, if you just look up John Seaman, it'll come up.
Okay.
Deal. But it has the whole story of Kabul Bank on the anti-corruption side, and then I go into the drug side. It's basically a lesson learned book for corruption and narcotics.
Is it written for the layman?
It's written for the layman, exactly written for the layman. I walk them through the process, very simplified. It's just like we're doing now. You have to look through this for your audience. You have, from our perspective, everything I'm talking about, we're talking about the rule of law, good governors. If you go into a foreign country, if you don't have good governance, the country will fail. So that was one of the purposes. And the problem we had in Afghanistan was drugs were a huge threat because that drugs were funding the insurgency. And that was one of the key points. Was I talked about that 960 law getting passed, why that was so important, because that gave us jurisdiction now. So we're doing a case. We're looking at the Taliban and the drug traffickers together in a conspiracy to do what? Sell drugs. But we're also using the 960. So all the terrorism acts of killing U.S. soldiers, Afghan civilians, blowing them up, using terrorism devices, that kind of thing. Those are all would be able to be used and charged if we could prove each one of those individually as criminal overt act. So we had a twofer here, drugs, terrorism together. And that was the sex appeal of the whole indictment. Now, why is that important to the audience? The audience needs to understand this. At the same time, this was probably one of the largest DA investigations ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
At the same time, SOD, the Special Operations Division, under Derek Maltz, they were doing another operation on the Iranians on Hezbollah, just as big, just as had the same concept, and they were making inroads. At the same time frame, the Obama administration not only killed our case for political reasons, they killed the Hezbollah case for political reasons, because they didn't want them causing problems. They were negotiating with the Iranians for their deal, and they didn't want the Hezbollah case to interfere with their negotiations, just as they didn't want our case, the Taliban case, to interfere with their negotiations with the Taliban. And what's sad about that, and the public doesn't realize this, here we are in the middle of a war on terrorism. We spent almost $1 trillion on this, tons of people. And yet the two largest criminal investigations in U.S. history on terrorism were shut down for political reasons. That's in a nutshell.
Again, I want to say, John, this is all documented. This is all open source. Interesting enough, John talked about Special Operations Division in DEA and other federal agencies combined. I did 3-year tour there myself, which I can't talk about those operations till 2025, John. It's still underneath. Okay. But for the rest of you, you have a man here, served his country as I did and many others, from the front lines of what you're hearing. This is not we're not politicians. John's not running for office, are you, John?
I'm a fact finder. Brian,
okay.
all we are is professional fact finders.
You got it. Okay, there you go. So I want to make sure the audience understands that. So a lot of times, and this is the angel dog thing, right? The people on the line, I don't care if it's an assembly line, the guy laying the concrete, the woman driving the friggin' tractor, bulldoze, whatever it is, and the military all included, firefighters, the whole thing. Nobody ever comes to the line, people. Nobody. And I'm going to critique our own former agency. Where are they now on the border and this kind of thing? Which I'm sure you work with Border Patrol like I did. And we don't have to comment on that, but I just want to kind of express my own angst there, is because I don't get it. I'm sure myself and John have had this conversation before. Why we're not hearing from them? Where they at?
Well, that's one of my biggest concerns is nobody hears any of this information because it never gets reported. But all this information that I'm stating is public record, out in the open. There's been numerous articles that were picked up besides Josh Myers. If you were to query his article in 218, you'll pick up maybe 10 different other articles. All this is documented by other people. It's just that the mainstream media shut everything down. That's what I'm saying. When they talk about censorship and suppression, they shut it down. It's just like DEA. If you were to go to DEA headquarters today and ask them about Operation Reciprocity, is what the Taliban operation was, the nickname, what it was called, just like Derek's case was the Operation Hezbollah. Nobody at DEA headquarters would be able to tell you anything about this, because I left in 2013. Mike Marsack retired shortly thereafter. All the agents, the case got shut down. Everybody went their own separate ways. Nobody in current management from 2015 on were aboard. So they have no idea what happened in Afghanistan at all. And yet, Brian, we lost 3 agents over there in 2009, I believe, on a helicopter doing counter narcotics races. And that was the whole purpose of why I wrote the book and been vocal about this, because we were there 20 years and we've got nothing to show for it. But yet all these people that went over there, they did a tremendous job. They did their jobs. They didn't fail. The leadership failed them. That's where the difference is.
Yeah, I'm going to pause 1 minute here real quick. Just hold on 1 sec. As we're discussing right now, audience, again, my angst, I retired from DEA in 2008, downrange, as they say. And John was a little, went on to did contract work after that. I did contract work myself, certain other places overseas, but it was in a training capacity. But anyway, it just angst both of us, if I may speak for me and you, John. That where are us? Where, even in the FBI today, and we're going to get to that in a minute here. Where are the workers? Is it, and it's just something to speculate here for everybody, for the audience. And on all the talk shows, it comes up all the time as to where's the rank and file. Now they call them whistleblowers, right? They're coming forward. Well, John doesn't have to chime in on this, my view of what everybody can see on the news now, whether it be the IRS, whistleblower, whoever, ATF, and certainly FBI. I don't get it. I mean, I don't understand. They don't have a place to stand today. They don't have a place to speak. And if they do speak, they're going to be just annihilated, whether it be professionally, personally, or whatever. So that's another podcast. But anyway, let's get back to the subject matter at hand. Okay. So, John, anything else you want to put in on that?
Well, I'd like to drive home that the one point you say, I don't understand why these people in these agencies. I can give you a pretty good encapsulation on why we're sitting here today. Okay. Because that's the question I asked, is how does this country move forward in restoring the public faith in the rule of law and the justice system, when right now, under the current administration, there is no justice system. You have a two-tier system. So the illusion that we have this justice system is an illusion. There is no justice system. There's a justice system for those in power that are controlling the levels of power. Okay. And that's where this is where your red flag should go up for your public, because think about this. If they can do 6 years of Russia, when you have no proof of Russia, and that's your big point, and you can get half the public to believe this, and you get to this point, and nobody goes to jail. As you see, FBI agents can lie on affidavits. You can have FBI supervisors. Are we going to frame them? Are we going to get them to lie? I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my entire career. And I spent 6 years in internal affairs. So I'm very familiar with the process. I want to tell the public this. This is where your Congress needs to do their job. Right now, none of this of what you saw over the last 6-7 years should have ever occurred, because we have checks and balances in the system. Brian knows this as an agent. If an agent doesn't follow investigative protocol, if he doesn't follow A, Y, and Z, he's going to have a case on him, either an OPR case or a criminal case or an admin case for not following the rules. So it's not like there's not to do. What happened here was all the checks and balances, the IG system, the internal affairs system of the Inspector General has been partisanized, and criminal are allowed to be pressured by the politicians. So you don't have any checks and balances, period. I will say this. If you, in one of the articles, if you read my Substacks, Glenn Greenwald in 2018 or 2019 wrote 3 great articles. Did a deep dive on the Obama administration in 2012 on how they weaponized the National Security Division. And he laid it out so well and explains on how they did it. And it's a tremendous piece. Very simple. When they got in, they realized that you can neuter the whole inspector general system, just ignore it. So that's what they did. Secondly, when they got in, they controlled the security process, which means the FBI does all the backgrounds on everybody that gets hired in the federal government, at least most of them. So if you want to put people in jobs and agencies, they streamline the system so on the new people that get hired from that point on to current, they think alike like the people of that administration. So when you ask yourself, how do all these people think alike in all these different federal agencies? Part of it is the political appointees that are the ideals come in, but a lot are the new professionals that came in because they think like that. And I'll give you a great illustration. Elvis Chan, agent hired, I believe in 2016, he's finishing up his thesis. What was his thesis on? The Russian Trump collusion hoax. But he wrote it that Trump was guilty and included with the Russian. Who is he? He's the one that got involved with Twitter, Facebook, and became the head of San Francisco, the interface between all the high-tech, big tech companies. The one where the federal judge just ruled that the federal government cannot do censorship or suppression with these big tech companies anymore. So that gives you a good example of how they did it. How you get agents like Peter Strzok that claims they think they're heroes when in reality, they're traitors to their oath of office and to the country for not following the law. Because every one of these people violated their oath of office on the deal. And when you ask the question, one of the things Durham did when he was doing his interviews, FBI agents, he was shocked at why nobody came forward. Okay. And that the reason is because the agency was ran out of headquarters, top to bottom, and anybody that went against would be transferred, that pressure on. So everybody was afraid for their jobs. So when you put that kind of environment in and you do that, and this didn't happen overnight. We're not talking about this happened this was a well planned out, well thought out thing. And it started when Eric Holder specifically 2014, he reorganized the whole National Security Division, taking the power and putting it under the deputy director there. And they put an ideologue lady. She was the lady, I think her name was Gupta. She's the one that convinced Sessions to stay out of, to not get involved, which allowed Rosenstein to appoint Mueller as a special counsel. Okay. And even though Rosenstein and the FBI and them knew there was no evidence of Trump Russian, by that time they already knew there was no evidence of Trump Russian.
At that time, yes. Hold on, John. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Then I want you to back it up a little bit for the audience.
Yeah.
Have you in your career, and I'm going to sound off myself, have you let's take our federal careers as federal drug agents, okay? Which involved, big time, like you're talking about, international, national, all the way down to local, state, and narco trafficking. There's even agencies we work with child sex trafficking, and of course, narco-terrorism, and all the weapons involved. Did anybody ever pull you off a case prior to your retirement? Anybody ever tell you to stop on the criminal side because your investigation was going in a certain direction or after a certain clientele? Did anybody ever stop you?
Never.
And same with never. Me. You hear that, audience? Not once. Not once.
If they would have, I probably would have asked some very hard questions on that.
Absolutely. And John, I'm just going to, let me just say, I did Hell's Angels. I did the Crips and Bloods, cartel, worked as special SOD, Special Operations, South America. Nobody ever once said, stop doing anything. Like, hey, John, you better pull back from that case. We don't want you going there anymore. Ever happen to you?
And you make a very salient point, Brian, because this is what the public needs to understand.
Yeah, they don't hear this.
But the public, rightly so, you want to trust your agencies. You want to trust the FBI. You want to trust the Secret Service. you want to trust them. However, when those agencies are no longer proved trustable like they are now, you have a complete reverse osmosis going on where the criminals are inside your agencies criminalizing and going after their citizens. And that's what you have here. These agents, when I hear people on these talk shows and they go, well, it's not the agency force. Let me explain to everybody. When you're a federal agent and you take that oath of office, you don't get to choose and look away on criminality within your agency. So if you're involved in an investigation with your fellow agents and you see your fellow agents doing something against the law or questionable, you have an obligation to report it. And if you don't report it, you can get jammed up under the old system. We would jam up agents right and left.
You're going to Leavenworth.
Yeah.
It's a
no, I didn't. Or I did. Why didn't you report it? Well, he's my friend. Oh, well, you can't. We cannot afford. The reason why we kept the system on the checks and balances on the IA side so tight was because it keeps the system safe. It protects the rights of the citizen. You need to have agents that put the law above party, their ideology, but they enforce the law. It comes down to enforcing the law. And if you get an agency force like you had on these, and all you have to do is read some of these after interviews, the public on some of these agents. Why didn't they report it? Some of these are senior agents. They knew better. When a senior agent tells me, or in an interview sits there and says, well, you know, the brass, I didn't think there was anything illegal, but you knew they weren't following proper procedure. You knew there was something going on. I wouldn't let them get away with that. I'd bring them back and say, wait a minute, let's get down here. You're an agent. You knew they would, and get them there. You knew they were doing something nefarious. And that's what has to happen. You have to, if you're going to stop this cancer, you have to change the culture. And right now in the FBI, it goes into the agency force, it goes into the mid-management, and it goes to the top. And as long as they say, well, we'll just change the top, that ain't going to cut the mustard. You've got to stop it in the deal. If they ever hire a new director under new administration, you go in, and if you're going to keep the FBI alive, you go in and you clean house. You bring every agent in, you sit them down, you tell them you have one job. You're going to follow the law. Oath is to the president. Oath is to the law first. Whatever, you get orders, you question them, you bring them in. You've got to pass. It's not like you can't go and talk to somebody. I'm not saying that you hide anything or from that standpoint.
You know,
but the checks and balances there to protect us, to protect the citizens. Because what the public needs to know is, we want you to trust us. So when I get up on a stand, or you get up on a stand, Brian, or a law enforcement officer gets on a stand, the only reason you're going to convict somebody is that you believe what we're saying to you is the truth. And that's the whole system is built on the truth. And once we betray that truth, which has happened now, I don't know how you put an agent on the stand today. And not question his veracity on the.
Well, on that note, John, this is a great discussion right here. Just a little bit off. Well, not really. It's involved in what we're going to go forward on, which is the current state of affairs, which we are talking about, audience. And I've not heard it discussed enough amongst people like ourselves, professionals. I mean, we spent almost 6 decades together, along with the rest of our group. Along with military guys that were involved in counter-narcotics overseas and all the special ops groups, all of them. I just don't, if the system breaks down, the country breaks down. There's nothing, you know. And
no country.
And I say this in all due respect. I say to my new bride, by the way, I've only 6 months. I say now, I don't know what our neighbors think. I live rural. I don't know what if they work construction, they're blue collar, they're farmers. What could they possibly think when they watch the evening, whatever news, select any station you want, and they see what we're talking about? How can they trust anybody even the local mayor in the state and the governor. This is craziness. This misinformation crap is going on. Crazy.
Well, that's where we're at today, Brian. Where a search for the truth is facts. When half the country doesn't care or give a crap about facts or evidence or the truth, you're in the quagmire. Why we're here today? Because you've got and one thing I have to say about Durham did right. In Durham, he had 5 great salient points in his report.
Okay, well, hold on, John. Let's go right into the Durham. Let's go right into the background.
Okay, well, the number one point that Durham said out of his report was that this was a conspiracy.
Okay.
Now let me explain why that's important.
Please.
Okay, because you have the agreement that happened in 2016, where you had, I believe, the Russians intercepted a conversation between one of Hillary's advisors talking about their plan. And what was the plan? The plan was they were going to taint Trump with colluding with the Russians to keep her email scandal away from the public. Okay, that was taken to Brennan. That was where you get the notes out of Brennan.
Brennan being in the
Brennan would be in the head of the CIA, the head of British intelligence.
Gotcha.
Wrote him a highly classified thing, basically regurgitating what I just said on what transpired. Brennan writes, they have meetings at the White House, all sorts of, they have, and this has been reported by other media factions. After that came out, you had meetings on around the 24th, 25th, 6th, 27th, 28th by all these advisors, top advisors of Obama. Okay, but Brennan, instead of and President Obama, instead of stopping it right there and having the FBI start a criminal investigation on the DNC and Hillary Clinton for their plan, Brennan instructs the FBI on a electronic communication to open 4 cases up on Trump's people. And hence that's where you have Peter Strzok opens up the first case, I believe, on the 31st of August, and then the day after on the other 3. So that's where all this comes about. So that's when you look at the conspiracy in a sense, it should have stopped right there, but it didn't stop right there. It continued. You had that's where Durham, the second point I'm going to make, he said it was a conspiracy. There's the conspiracy. What was the agreement? The agreement was to interfere in the 2016 election. That was the conspiracy between Hillary and the DNC. Now,
John, hold on 1 second. For the audience, let's just explain real quick how Durham got involved. Where did Durham come from? Give us just a little.
Well, Durham got a point. Bill Barr in Durham went over to Italy in October of 2019 to go meet with Joseph Massoud's lawyer.
Okay.
Joseph Massoud was the guy on the Papadopoulos case that allegedly introduced or told Papadopoulos that the Russians had information on Hillary's emails, and they were the ones that broke into the DNC, which was all bullcrap, by the way. All right. So when Durham and Barr get over there, what happened was they were told that by Massoud's lawyer that Massoud was a Western intel asset. And it makes sense because the meetings between Papadopoulos and Massoud started in April of 2016, way before the infamous meeting between Papadopoulos and the ambassador in a British bar in June of 2016. So now remember how the FBI and everybody told us how the Trump-Russian collusion hoax started. It started in a bar of the meeting between Papadopoulos and the Australian ambassador in a bar. Okay. But that's not really where this thing goes. When you start backtracking and working backwards, Brennan and all these folks were already targeting Trump's people. How do we know that? Because when I started doing my homework, after Mueller came out with his case they with the exculpatory information that there was no Russian collusion between Trump or his people, period. That ended it for me. So I did a deep dive into the Mueller case. Okay, what did they do and what didn't they do? Let's start with that. What they didn't do was they didn't look at Hillary association with the Russians. They didn't look at John Podesta's associations with the Russians, nor his associations with Paul Manafort. Okay,
do we know why? Do we know why they did, John? Do we know why?
Oh, I know why they didn't. Yeah, because so they didn't look into the associations with the oligarchs that they had. They didn't look at Steele's associations with the same oligarchs. Okay, they didn't look at any of that information, because if they would have, there would have been no basis whatever to ever open any cases on Trump's people under that rouge.
And what was their mission on that?
Well, the mission was, is you had Rosenstein write a scope memo on the Trump colluding with the Russians and the people. However, you have to back up the case and go way before all this and go backwards. In 2015, the Dutch Netherlands, okay, in a article, and one of the articles I documented it, they broke into the Russian intelligence service called Cozy Bear.
Who's they, John? Who did the break?
They're Russian cyber guys listening, doing disinformation, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Same thing we do to them, they do to us. Okay. So they're kind of like the cyber attack dogs for the Russian intelligence service. Okay. They gave that information and worked with the NSA on this information. The NSA broke into them and were listening to them on full time. They actually, it's documented in this. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm thinking about, man, this is really classified stuff, but it's all in there in this article. They actually talk about in real time watching the Russian intelligence service break into the State Department computer system and take all the information in real time in 2:15 out of the system. Okay, so what does that tell you? Let me tell the public there. That tells you that our intelligence agencies are aware of what the Russians are doing, how they're doing it at that time. Why is that important? Okay, because the ruse that they told us is that the Russians were the ones that broke into the DNC and stole their information. Total garbage. Okay, total garbage. So then you have Brennan. When did Brennan get told? The beginning. Brennan's the key to the whole case, because Brennan testified, or let me put it this way. The British put out an article in 2:15 out of the Guardian and said they were the first ones to notify U.S. intelligence of possible Trump-Russia associations. The Brits. Okay. And where does that come from? Well, the Brits didn't want to see Donald Trump elected, the MI5 guys. That was obvious. You had a close relationship. Steele's wife worked for the head of MI5. Okay, so now you can start piecing the associations and everybody. You know what it is. It's a close knit. I know you, you know me, we're buds. So you have to look at it from an association deal on who knows who and how did the little pieces come together. The little pieces by themselves is hard to decipher. On a case like this, you had so much disinformation put out to the public, and I don't blame the public at all. The public was lied to every day by every major organization. You had a new report come out here accusing this person of that or this one of that. It was all total lies, all total. So you had all this disinformation. And that's one of the things I did. I took all the reporting I could get my hands on and started putting it together in timelines, who said what here, how did it all come together. And you start painting a real picture show and these little pieces together. And I have to tell you, Brian, they had me a little stumped, because remember when they declassified the Inspector General's report on the 4 footnotes in the report, and they stated that this was probably Russian disinformation or Russian service had penetrated the Steele dossier? Total bullshit. All those 4 notes it's the old intelligent ploy of making the Russians the responsible party on the thing.
It's a
none of those
tactic of false
yeah,
flag.
and all the reporting from conservative, and even I thought to myself, because I read it wrong the first year looking at this, was that I thought, this is weird. Why would Hillary, Obama, and these folks be doing a disinformation campaign at the same time the Russians were doing a disinformation campaign on top of theirs, on them? So how does that come together? And then I really started, before I finished up my last thing last year and capsulizing everything, I realized that this was a typical intel trick that they use to, again, make the Russians be the responsible party when there's no evidence to show that the Russians had any wherewithal, especially in the Steele dossier. The guys who gave the information for the Steele dossier came out of Clinton's camp, came out of Charles Dolan to DeVecchio, who worked for Steele. Didn't come out of the Russians.
John, during this time, stay on this, but let me interject and ask. During this time with this misinformation team, right?
Yeah.
What about the social media, the Facebook, and all these other Twitter, Instagram? What you've read, not myself?
Well, that stuff comes into the 2020 election.
Okay.
Let's start. You got to start from the beginning of this show. So let's start from the original.
All right.
You have the U.S. government is told by the Brits that the Russians have intercepted an intercept on a Clinton advisor talking about their plan to interfere in the election by tainting Trump with Russian collusion. Right there. You got the start of your case right there. That happens in July of 2016. What happens thereafter? You have Brennan, Obama, and them. They could have shut this down. They could have ordered the FBI to investigate. Instead, what did they do? The FBI opened 4 cases on Team Trump. Okay, knowing that he had nothing to do with it. Let me back up one further thing. Fusion GPS. They started in 2015. Nellie Orr, who was a CIA prior analyst, went to work for them. She did all the analysis and any associations, just like you do any kind of research on your opposition. Do they have any ties to whatever? And so she did all the business ties of Trump's businesses or contacts in Russia. Glenn Simpson, who was the guru, had put together, and they were going to try this strategy of theirs when John McCain ran against Obama in 2008. That's what they were going to do to him, was to run the Russian narrative against him.
So it didn't make any. So what you're saying there is, it didn't make any difference who was running. Am I right?
That's right. At the time frame, that Glenn Simpson is the guru of this idea, guilt by association for political dirty tricks. And that's important for your audience to understand.
Yeah, it is.
As long as they're not violating the law, that is not a crime. Okay? So that's what they were going to do. However, that got blown up because the FBI went and briefed McCain that Manafort and Gates had associations with oligarchs. So he withdrew out of McCain's campaign. So they never played it on McCain. Okay? Now, you go to 2016. He wrote a book on this, taking all the credit for doing Trump on the Trump Russian was his idea and all that. Here's where the criminality comes in, and the public needs to understand why this becomes a criminal conspiracy case. In August, you have her attorney, Mark Ellis, and her other attorney, Sussman, out of Pookie, Coy, and whatever that represents the DNC, and Hillary, the law firm, go and meet with Steele and feed him false information that Trump is connected with the Russians through the famous Alpha Bank, which is a Russia-associated bank. Why that's important is because they conspired with a tech person who contracted out with 3 or 4 professors at Georgia Tech to put together a fake text stuff showing contact, cyber contact between Trump Tower and that. So they basically manufactured a crime. They fed that to Steele, the two attorneys did. That's what happened. Steele put that in his dossier, the Alpha Bank connection in his dossier. Okay, there's your first criminal overt act.
Yeah.
Manufacturing a crime. And Durham, to his credit, if you read his first indictment on Sussman, he has it all in there. He meets all the elements for the crime of conspiracy to defraud the public in that first indictment. Okay. He just didn't do an indictment for conspiracy on those people. He could have broken that. Instead of indicting Sussman for lying to the FBI, he had a perfect right there, small conspiracy case right there. He could have done. He could have done Ellis. He could have done Sussman. He could have done the tech guy. He could have done the 3 Georgia Tech folks, and then all the others involved, the funding, Hillary, all them involved in the beginning of that conspiracy case. But that's not where it stopped, okay? Because prior to that, okay, let's back up now. Let's go back to April. I got to put this in context for your audience so they get a clear picture, show what's happening.
April of
2016.
Oh, okay.
In late March, Trump has an interview with the New York Times.
Yeah.
He names 4 people as part of his forum. They ask him who's some of your buy. He names 4 people off the top of his head. April 1st, the FBI opens a case on Carter Page. Who is Carter Page? He's one of those associates that Trump names as an advisor. Well, Carter Page, you all now know, was a former naval officer, was a source for both the FBI and the CIA. Okay, in fact, he had given information and had testified in an FBI case that got I believe a Russian spy convicted in 2014 or 15, somewhere in that time frame. So he was a known commodity. But yet you had the FBI New York office from directions from their headquarters to open a case on Carter Page. Why? Okay. 2, you have a meeting on April 4th, I believe. Susan Rice, Brennan, Comey, Clapper on the 4 guys they discussed. Papadopoulos, Flynn, Manafort, and Page. Brennan, what does Brennan do? Brennan opens up 2 task forces, okay, on the focus on these 4, a joint terrorism, CIA, FBI part, okay, out of it. So now you start asking questions. Why would Susan Rice want to have a meeting and discuss these people? And why were these 4 discussed? For what reasons on the deal? Then you go from that time frame. You had, and as far as the task forces, you had a retired CIA officer, and it's documented, it's in the Substacks, but he's also out there on his own, has verified that Brennan opened those task forces. So you have an actual person inside the CIA at the time verifying truth. We verified that the New York Field Division opened their case on April 1st. The division did. So those facts are true. The only thing left is the meeting, getting the notes in the meeting. And that's something somebody would have to do, like Congress or that. Why would at that high level, would you open up the deal? Now, in April is when you start seeing
John, let me ask you a question from what we both know on conspiratorial investigations in the drug war. Let's just say that. You don't use it anymore, right? But wouldn't that direction have to come from the White House itself?
Oh yeah. Well,
all the way up at the top.
It has to. This is all coming. This is all president. This is all presidential stuff.
Yeah, this is this level.
This is the crime. That's why going back when you asked, we were going to cover the 5 points on Durham. 1, it's a conspiracy. So he sets out the agreement. He implicates Obama and Biden in the conspiracy. Okay. So how do you implicate them? They're the ones, Obama lets the case go forward. Okay, you have struck in them in their Texas, the president wants to know in everything we're doing. So I mean, when does the president of the United States, Brian, in any criminal case you've ever worked in, where you have to text the president and he wants to know where you're at in your case file? Never. Okay, we never get to that level.
You couldn't even talk to the SAC. You couldn't even talk to the special agent in charge, barely.
So now you have to put this whole show, you have to timeline it out and look backwards. And that's why I took my time and I documented this in the Substack in part 1 and part 2 that breaks all this down on
these are all available, right? Still,
these are all available, they're all there. It'll break it down. Some are lengthy, but the stuff by itself is meaningless. Okay.
That's it.
But when you put it together, it is like the weakest link. Those links are very strong. And that's how you build a conspiracy case, is you build it piece by piece. You build the wall, you cement it, and then it's real easy to explain to a jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the crime here of the century is real simple. You have the following co-conspirators, okay, conspired to do what? To interfere in not only the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and now the 24 election through numerous what we call overt acts. And you walk them through what we call a continuing conspiracy by the overt acts. And it's real simple. You have in August of 2016, Clinton and the DNC attorneys meeting with Steele, fabricating a crime. You have in September or October, the FBI agent Kleinsmith lying to a FISA court and his supervisors on what's going in the warrants. So they now get warrants on 4 people to include the president of the United States. So they're listening on all these people now that are all illegal warrants, every one of them.
Based on, explain that, John. Explain that. Illegal warrants.
Okay. When you get, we have a thing in our law that the court put in there to prevent overreach by zealot prosecutors. So to punish zealous prosecutors to protect the citizenry, when a zealous prosecutor goes and does a case and gets their evidence by illegal means, that means all the evidence obtained is going to be thrown out under the fruits of the forbidden tree. So any cases that generate there, unless they stand on their own individual merits separately, if it came from there, none of that can ever be, it has to be thrown out. And that's what you have here. So let me walk you to the next step. Right. You have the warrant, the line. Then you have what happens? Trump gets elected. What happens? Obama comes on TV and tells the nation that the Russians didn't change any votes. Okay. But what did he do? He tells Trump that not to hire Flynn. Why wouldn't you want Flynn hired? Because Obama knows Flynn's going to revamp the CIA system, and Flynn's going to discover that Obama, for the last 6 years of administration, has been illegally spying on Americans, called unmaskings. And we're talking thousands of Americans, senators, whatever. So now you've got now you see where that national security division that was revamped by Holder, now you see where this starts coming in. So you're building that base power base. You're hiring the people that think like you ideology. You build a system now, the NSA. And if it wasn't for Mike Rogers doing an audit in March of 2016, you would have never known about all the illegal unmaskings that went on. And what's sad about this, and this is where it comes back to your audience on why the justice system is broken, is because the judges on those FISA courts ruled that all that was done illegally, but nobody went to jail. Nothing happened to any of those guys. And here's the sad part. The contracting agency that the FBI used has never been identified, that took all the NSA information with them. But where? I
Okay,
have no idea.
explain that, John, to the audience. What you contract agency? Explain.
Okay, the FBI contracted out to cyber groups, and they had a contracting agency that worked with them inside the NSA, and they were going in and taking NSA information and compiling it.
Now, for the audience, these are not LEOs. These are not federal agents.
These are not federal agents. These could be former federal agents. It could be former federal employees, but they're contractors. They're not under color of authority on the deal. They're hired. They probably have clearances. But here's the problem. They're taking classified information. The FBI is working on behalf of the FBI. And then the question is, where did that unit go? Here's the key part. There's a text between Peter Strzok and his lover, Lisa Page, on the day that Rogers testifies before Congress on the discovery of all the Pfizer abuses. And on there, I forget how the text says, but it basically says this: oh shit, we got to get to the what? Go see so-and-so at WFO. Shit's going to hit the fan. Okay. So that right there.
Washington Field.
So that gives you a heads up that how extensive this goes. This, as I say, when it doesn't happen in a vacuum, this is very well planned out, very well thought out, and that's why you see the increments that you see. Now let's go to the next overt act. Would be in December. I call it the rewriting of the.
You're talking 16 still, John? 2016?
This is December of 2016. December, around the December 1st, President Obama puts an executive order in.
So Trump has already been nominated.
He's been nominated. He's the next president.
Next president, got it.
He's taken over in January. So Obama, he tells the country, because remember all the stuff was that, Trump-Russian collusion, the Russians helped them and blah, 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 right? That was the whole thing. Okay, that was their whole game plan. Let me just say this. The Russians, yes, they had some involvement on cyber stuff in there, but not to the extent that they made any difference in any elections or changed votes or from that standpoint. However, they use that whole break-in of the DNC that the Russians were the ones behind. The Russians had nothing to do with the DCN break-in. Okay, period. End of story on that. No evidence whatsoever. In fact, the CrowdStrike guy that testified, who put out the information that Cozy Bear, remember that agency, the one that I told you the Dutch had identified and the NSA were, that was Cozy Bear operation. Okay, and the cyber people the guy that testified for CrowdStrike, and when they first came out, they put out that it looks like it's the Russians. Well, then he had to recant 2 years later in Congress. They had no evidence could prove that the Russians had ever infiltrated the computer system. Ask yourself this, ladies and gentlemen. Here you have a case where the accusation is a major foreign power had infiltrated a political party and a political candidate of the other party, national security breach. Why would the FBI never go get a grand jury, get search warrants, seize the computers, and do the work that you need to do? Instead, they contract out to CrowdStrike, who were former FBI agents and friends of those of Comey and those guys. So you had these friendship interlinks where they allowed a private company to do the analysis on the computers. And then when they did the original analysis, they put out disinformation to the public that it was the Russians. And then 2 years later had to recant that before and take it back that they had no idea. They couldn't prove that it was Russian.
John?
They assumed, but they couldn't prove. Big difference, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely.
Damage done. Country, it was told, the Senate, all this stuff, it was the Russians.
Torpedoes in the back. It's already hit, man. Already hit.
So you got it. So the public's getting bombarded by the lies.
Yep.
They're believing the lies, half the lies. So you got half the country. So then you get the ICA, which is the next big shoe to drop on the Russian to move this Russian hoax.
Explain ICA, John. Explain that.
Okay, it's the Intelligent Community Assessment. On December around the 1st, Obama changes the distribution of intelligence, where for an ICA, it would be put together by only 3 agencies. It would be put together by the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the FBI. However, Obama put on distribution the other 15 or 16 agencies to have access to it, meaning
Intel
they
group,
would have
17 of the Intel group. DEA's on that. You talking about that?
Yeah, everybody.
And-
Right? So it would make it almost impossible if you leaked out any of that information to the public, which happened, to be able to find out who the source of the leak was. And it also enabled Obama and his ilk to control the information on what came out of that ICA. And this is the ICA that Brennan and Deal put in there, that the Russians were favoring Hillary, and everything was for Hillary, or they were, up for Trump's favor to get Trump elected to do a deal, which was not true, because you had a whole faction within the CIA that's been documented said that bullcrap. The Russians couldn't care less. They were an equal opportunity divider. Okay. And so instead of even looking at that, he shut them down. Okay. So they wrote the ICA, it's one deal. 2 agencies said they gave it high probability, CIA and the FBI. NSA gave the lowest, said very low marks, said it was true. But nobody else signed off on it other than those 2. Now, Andy McCabe was told Obama wanted to have the Steele dossier put in the intelligence assessment report. The one thing that Brennan did do is he fought to keep that out of the actual report on the report itself. However, they included the Steele dossier into the appendix of the report, meaning it's an appended document showing support that the Russians were interfering in the election. Another total lie. And they knew at that time that that whole Steele dossier was a manufactured document by Dolan, the DNC, and by their people. The Russians had nothing to do with any of that. Okay.
And John, at that time, I mean, everybody by now knows what the game plan is with the social media, but the news, the news sources were just, printing exactly what you're talking about. I mean, everywhere, printing, hearing, seeing, whatever, tweeting,
Well, remember, as soon as that ICA was released, what happened? The next day, you had the big report come out of the dossier itself, everything. So when you put it all together, this was, again, all selectively timed out. When you time, there's like in one of the Substacks, and this isn't my work, Margaret Cleveland and a few others on the Federalist, Molly Hemingway, they did outstanding work. 2 of their articles, they documented all this on the press, and really laid out the lies by the press. The 2 New York guys that got the Pulitzers and all this, I mean, they have it very well documented. So all I'm doing is,
John, did their stuff come out around when your Substacks?
No, my stuff. Yeah, no, their stuff had already been out there.
Okay.
Majority of the information, like the Solomon and Sarah Carter's and the Lee Smith stuff, and the
How long has it been out?
And Jarrett's stuff, and even McCarthy writing their books, Ball of Fire, and Jarrett wrote a great book on the witch hunt and all. They had all that stuff. A lot of the information, good from legal stuff. However, what they didn't do, Brian, they reported the information, but they never put it through the prism of a criminal case. What statute would it fall under, and what would you prosecute this for? Nobody. That's the difference between what the public reads from everybody else. All this great reporting you read every day on the Biden stuff and all that, and that's great stuff. Don't get me, great stuff. It's great that the public knows the truth, because then they know that the system is corrupt. That's great. But if you're not going to hold people criminally accountable for this and show how you've got to hold somebody responsible for this,
It's
how
just
do
a
you move
report.
forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody goes to jail.
Nobody.
How does the country move forward? And those are the questions, as I write in my Substack, and I always write the same question all the time, is how do you move forward as a country to restore the rule of law if you're not going to hold anybody accountable for the crime of the century, the Russian hoax? Until you do that, the Biden stuff is kind of separate in one part, but
Say the
it's still,
Biden stuff, you talk about Hunter and the Ukraine.
yeah,
And
the Hunter
Burisma
stuff could
and all
be
that.
its own case. But however, the Hunter stuff, due to the fact you had the 51 guys write the letter and you had all the obfuscation, those are actually overt acts of the Russian hoax conspiracy, because Biden jumped in the conspiracy when they did Flynn in the famous meeting in when they met on January 5th between Obama, Biden, Yates, Comey, on basically how we gonna do this. And that's where Biden brings up the Logan Act. You know, remember the talk of the Logan Act, how we're gonna deal. At that time, nobody knew. Think about this. At the time, here's the truth of the matter. The FBI agent out of New York was going to close the case on Flynn because there was no evidence, period. Strzok kept the case open, got direction from headquarters, and they went and talked to Comey with no lawyer. That's when they used the rouge and went right to him. Okay. And they used the Sisolak deal. That's where the information leaked on the conversation. And my sources tell me it was James Baker, the FBI agent, not James Baker, the DOD guy. Because in Sidney Powell's filings before the court, in a section there, she names James Baker, but she puts DOD, and it wasn't him. According to my sources, it was the FBI, James Baker. How do I know that? Because the information told to me was that KT McFarland, the advisor for Flynn, was in the driver's seat when David Ignatius got the phone call from Baker, Baker telling him about the Sisolak phone call. Okay. And then McFarland goes and tells Flynn. Okay. And those are the questions I have, is that's important. Why is that important? Because Baker was the main witness on the Seaman case as a witness. And if he was the leaker, I'm just saying, if he was the real leaker, and I'm saying I'm alleging he's the leaker,
Legend.
if he was the leaker, he committed a felony. That's the problem.
I shake my head, audience. To us, to me, and John and others, and there are plenty of others, and I always say, every time I see one of these shows, I don't give a crap if it's Fox, MSNBC, whatever, CNN, whatever it is. And I say, John, I gotta say, I'm learning here with the audience from you, brother. Where's John? John, has anybody come to you, by the way? Has anybody?
I have spoken to,
one way or the other.
I've spoken to one of the guys that were heavily involved in ferrying this out.
Okay.
But for the life of me, him and this other person, they're both renowned reporters. I don't know why they don't use the information. Like, I keep going back to them and say, I wrote a Substack called The Forbidden Question. The Forbidden Question was, again, Massoud's involvement with Western intelligence, the entrapment operation against Papadopoulos, the entrapment operation with Halper, okay, in August, okay. Those are important because you have foreign involvement from foreign governments involved, the British primarily, helping the CIA and the FBI out on foreign soil to do entrapment operations. To do what? To gather information against a candidate at the time to interfere in a presidential election.
Well, John, educate me here, but in history, though, have we not had something similar years gone by? Haven't we?
To this extent, I've never seen anything where the people in charge
right? In
are
US
the ones manufacturing the crimes,
right?
like they're doing today on all. It's just like the impeachment trials were manufactured. Okay, the evidence on that they used to present was manufactured on the thing. There's no basis on why we should even have had these trials. If facts are facts, and I've never seen it anything like this in my entire life, where you have a guy who works on the National Security Council who considered himself the god of experts on the Ukraine, and is going to go under the cloak. He's a military hero and everything, and he puts in there that he had concerns about the president on his conversation with that, because he was afraid it was going to be hurt the bipartisanship funding for the Ukrainians to get funding from the bipartisan coalition if Trump asks these, without even looking at the gist of the conversation on what Trump actually said, the basic facts of what were the facts, that it was a law enforcement request that Trump was making because he had allegations. Mueller had just ended, and Trump as a president had a right, because why wouldn't you ask a country that's totally corrupt to find out were the Ukrainians involved in interfering in the 2016 election? And the evidence appears they were. And that's and so now you see what they do is they go on a good, the left and the media, what is the first thing they do? They attack the messenger. So when you look at anybody that starts putting this stuff out and taking this apart piece by piece, they go after the message. It's like Rudy Giuliani. Are you kidding me? Rudy Giuliani, for the audience, is probably one of the most well-respected U.S. attorneys ever. If it wasn't for Rudy Giuliani, the FBI would still be sucking lollipops, chasing mafia members around New York. Rudy Giuliani is the guy with the vision that saw how to use the new RICO, the racketeer influence organized crime cases statute, on how to go after and dismantle organized crime groups. He taught the DOJ attorneys and he taught the FBI agents on how to apply the elements of the statute for court, collect evidence, and hence you saw the results. It ended up destroying the New York families in New York. Now you're going to tell me a guy who is one of the most well-versed guys on taking out organized crime at the time, back in the 80s, and he's going to be put out by Veneman and all these people that he's a purveyor of disinformation. And
I'm just going to say,
I mean, you got to be kidding me. Especially when these guys never talk to any rule of law people in an embassy. I was in the consulate for 4 years in Hong Kong. I was in 2 years in Afghanistan. And trust me, if anybody wanted information from an ambassador to a head deal, they would always come to our section and ask, what did we have or whatever on the information, because we're the ones that have the communications with the local counterparts, our foreign counterparts. We're going to know if they're investigating or they're not investigating. We're going to know if it's corrupt or what's the situation or the nuances. Veneman, Hill, and that other guy never did any of that. They based all their perceptions based on their expertise as experts. Well, if that's the expertise, then, ladies and gentlemen,
no, wait a minute. John, we have people running the Department of Transportation, don't throw the name out, that can't fix a pothole in their former mayorship, okay?
Yeah.
This is insanity. Well, hold on, did we wrap up all 5 of Durham's points?
Well, no, we haven't.
Let's go to 4, and then we'll come. Right.
The third one was that he exposed that we have a 2-tier justice system.
Got it.
So that's, everybody sees that every day. You see that these people get arrested, these don't. So very plain and clear for the public to see that the justice system right now does not work. The people in power could care less about equal justice under the law. And that's why I stress to the public that 224 is so important, because the American public is going to be the determining factor on what road this country goes down.
On that note, John, for the audience, do you think, in your professional opinion, because you are a professional in this arena, my friend, no doubt about it. And audience, I'm getting a hell of an education, and all the reading I had to do for John is unbelievable. I can't remember these names. I'm gonna make a note here, and I have a question for you, John. Look at the way I'm pointing at you, John. Look at the way this man, audience, is reciting these facts, these names, these addresses. When you are a professional investigator and you're getting information from informants, from sources of information, thugs, white collar, blue collar, gang members, all the above. We've all the decades we've done, okay, where you can extract information, put it into what's going to be an indictment, and send that person to either a jury trial and or off to prison, okay? Not jail, prison. So what would you say? Do you think in an election this can be corrected? I mean, well, I don't want to go down the the election voting.
Well, let me just say this, Brian. That's why I write my Substacks, because I'm a solution-oriented guy. I always look at, how do you solve the problem? How do you restore the rule of law? And Durham, and here's the other salient point with Durham. Durham admitted he did not do a conspiracy investigation.
Okay.
Now, I would say he did an administrative inspection investigation on the procedures and protocol, on what the FBI did, kind of like we have an inspection division and DEA. They go out and they look at all the procedures. Did the agents cross the T's and dot the I's? That's what he did, basically. He didn't do a criminal conspiracy before. If he would have, he would have indicted all these folks under the conspiracy statute. Now, in saying that, you have the agreement that started in 2016. You have all the overt acts that you can walk up to the current one where Jack Smith just indicted Trump on indictment, and you had the New York prosecutor indict him on another indictment. You can walk those up because you have the same pattern of conspiracy involved. You have the same commonality of the same people involved in the decision-making process. So you have what we call a continuation conspiracy from the original agreement, no different than the case on the Taliban, who started their conspiracy agreement way back in the 1990s and continued up until present course with the drug trafficking. So, and here's the best part with the conspiracy case. The people that join the conspiracy, they don't have to know about the agreement. They just have to know they're there to do a common purpose. So what's the commonality between all these people that jumped in? What was the commonality? To destroy Trump. So there you got, and you don't even need to know. They joined that's what I'm saying. That's how you tie.
Let me ask a question. On that note, you mentioned McCain before, God rest his soul. Could it have been anybody? This happens to be the name Trump, or is it Trump, in your opinion?
Oh, it was part of I call it the resistant movement that Obama put together in December, and it's documented in one of the Substacks, and the two reporters wrote about it, how he was one of his organizations. They were going to put the resistant movement together within the federal bureaucracy. Remember, as soon as Trump got elected, you saw billboards all over DC the first 6 months. Report any criminality within the Trump administration. Yeah. I've never seen that happen. People can look this up. The public can look this up themselves. Google agencies 216 in January, February, March. Look at all these agencies that were talking how they were resisting, weren't following orders, wrote letters within the system and how they weren't going to do A, B, C, D. So you already have, you've got plenty of testimony. You've got all the Obama people. Remember, they interviewed hey, Trump's Russian collusion, right? Well, when they testified under oath, they had no evidence. But yet, what did they do? They kept putting it out there. So that's what I'm saying. That's where it becomes by itself would be meaningless, but in the context of a conspiracy where you have the agreement, you have the overt acts, and the best part the public needs to understand is the conspiracy statute doesn't expire until the last overt act. So if the last overt act is Trump's indictment by Smith, we've got till 2028 for a new president to come in, appoint a new AG, appoint a special counsel or a team of attorneys with competent agents and do the case.
So on that note, then, Joe, that answers the question that I'm asking for the public, so to speak. So in a new election, we clean house? Question mark. Yeah. You clean all the top, all the brass at the top agencies, NSA included. Yeah.
And you can hold everybody accountable for the crime of the century.
Oh.
And you can, and the beautiful part about this is you're taking the ones in charge now that are violating the law. You're going to be able to use the law against them and use it legally and explain to the public why. Because once this is put together, most of the work is Durham's done a lot of the work. The IG's done some of the work.
Okay.
But you put a team of investigators, you get all the communications of all the people, you identify everyone out, you look at the roles they played, you time out the commonalities, you time out the communications, you time out the overt acts, you time out it will come together like a drum, just like the Taliban case and just like the FARC case and any other conspiracy case. That's a beautiful part about a conspiracy. They can't hide or backtrack. And a lot of the stuff that they put out there, they gave open sources interview talking about what they were doing. How much better can you get than that?
It's all available. You hear that?
It's all there.
It's all available to dig. So,
and that's what bothers me is the guys like on our side, like Kash Patel, Matt Whitaker, even Giuliani, and all these guys in the rule of law you see on TV pontificating, Mark Levin, none of them, Don Bongino, who's a federal agent, he should know this. And you don't hear any of them talking about solution. Hey, you've got a pathway here. Here's how it can be done. All you hear about, well, nobody's going to jail. Or I remember hearing one of them, and I won't say who, said it's too complex. This is one of the easier cases to put together.
I agree with that observation on your part about the various names you just mentioned. However, I heard a gentleman, I'll give you his initials, big podcaster, AF, Alpha Foxtrot.
Okay.
He's a tough guy and self-made Brazilianaire, whatever he is. I really don't know too much about him, but he does hit on some interesting things. And the bottom line is, if you not you personally, but if your neighbor, and you go to a community, whatever, PTA meeting, you have kids from school, and they say, well, there's nothing I can do, or there's nothing we can do. And I'm not going to say anything. Guess what? We're all part of the problem.
Well, that's exactly right.
I the fornicating problem. I mean, so now what do? We're going to roll over into 24? If it's bad now, what's it going to be then?
Well, my warning to the public is this. If the American public doesn't vote out the ones in charge now, you won't ever have another chance, okay? Because they already consolidated their power. They're already telling you to your face, there's nothing you can do about it. We're in charge. This is your last opportunity at the public. So the public needs to understand this. Do you want to have a government that suppresses and censors and locks up people for what used to be called freedom of speech, where we have a differing opinion? Because now that's the danger you're in. I mean, think about this. They indicted that poor guy out of Eastern District and set the standard where the guy wrote the meme. And in the meme, he criticized Hillary Clinton, and they said that helped Hillary lose. How ridiculous is that? If the Supreme Court doesn't overrule that, then they should be knocking on my door, locking me up because I'm the
Oh,
purveyor of the.
that's why I'm asking you, John. So, well, we're in our seventh decade. So,
Yeah, but point is,
no, but hold on.
Yeah.
It's men and women that, like ourselves, who have been in the inner sanctum, have sat at meetings, and I've been there at DOJ when I was at SOD, where there was, and may I add, special operations units that had no name tags. Okay, the audience, that's a fact. Won't go any further than that. But the bottom line is, what happened? Like, where did the unity and, like you said earlier, the structure of the law of this country go? Where did it go? So hold on. So my neighbor, your neighbor, whatever, wherever you're at, Wisconsin, to make a difference. So what do we say? I'm asking you, how do we, what is the Band-Aid? No, not a Band-Aid, a tourniquet. What do we do for these broken limbs and bleeding out? What do we do?
Well, just as my warning to the public and why I'm writing what I'm writing, trying to raise the
Well, you're doing a hell of a job, brother.
the flag, the threat level to them is this: very simple. If you want freedom, you know who to vote for. If you want tyranny, you know who to vote for. There's your choices. If you want to restore, I'm a rule of law guy. I did this because I see that the rule of law has been destroyed right now. There is no, when people tell me, well, we still have rule of law, it's an illusion. There is no rule of law. Total, do not buy that garbage, that BS. You do not have rule of law. One party over another can criminalize the other. That ain't rule of law. That's banana republic stuff. And if that's where we want to go, if that's where you want to go, we will be Venezuela in no time. We will be China. We will be Russia. You won't have freedoms. People will be scared to death to say anything to anybody. And is that how, my question to everybody, is that how you want to live? When you have the option to end this, because you now have a pathway, this should galvanize. If I'm Donald Trump or if I'm DeSantis or the Republican Party, one of my mantles is I come out and I promise to the American public, I promise that I will restore the rule of law. One of the first things I will do is I will appoint a special prosecutor with a team of investigators. We are going to start at the origins, and wherever the chips may fall, we're going to end so this never happens again. We're going to revamp all the bureaucracy of these agencies where unelected bureaucrats don't have the authority to make allegations or false allegations against the president on upserting his authority. And I revamp the inspector general in the process. Right now, the National Security Division has no oversight, congressional, investigative, or otherwise. I call the National Security Division, the National Security Council, the cancer within that has metastasized. And it's like anybody that's ever had cancer, when it metastasizes and gets to stage 4, you're going to be dead. And that's what's going to happen to us.
I say this to all the great Americans. I mean, they get up, go to work, whatever it is that you do, whether you're a nurse, whatever, you're supporting the city, you're picking up trash, it doesn't make a difference. You're contributing in some way. You're a friggin' mechanic building cars, whatever, fixing cars. When does the common man and woman get enough of it that they say that's enough? You're saying the election, right? You're going to say, go to the polls, do the best you can. So you know what the counterpoint's going to be? Well, didn't we try that last time?
Nah,
We say that.
Look,
last election.
We can do the election stuff. That's, to me, move forward, not go backwards, because you're not going to relitigate. You're not going to relitigate an old thing like that.
No, I'm not saying that, but go ahead.
No, I understand that. I understand where people get disenchanted and hopelessness. Right. What I'm saying here is here's your ray of hope. You want, first of all, this isn't about Donald Trump. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This has to do with freedom, a tyrannical government. The Constitution was formed to limit federal government.
And
from a
that's
tyrannical government. In fact, the Constitution gives you the right as a citizen, if it goes tyrannical, to revolt legally. That's in the Constitution. I'm not advocating that, but what I'm saying is you have an opportunity here to restore faith back in your government. So the people that are running, you need to put the pressure on them and say, if we have a pathway to do this, why aren't you going to do it? Ask them the question. If you're elected president, are you going to prosecute the people that started the Russian hoax conspiracy? Because nobody's investigated it and nobody's been prosecuted. Until that happens, you don't move forward.
Oh, and that really is the bottom line on that right there. That that's not driving in the rearview mirror. That is a fact. If nobody's held accountable, then we have no rule of law. Actually, I was thinking while you were saying that, John, it doesn't even make a difference blue or red. It really is the country being a friggin' American. Okay. And that really is the bottom line. And freedom, if you lose the F word, the good F word, freedom, it's over. I mean, as a nation country, I mean, we really are. Done. Well, John, we're going on like 2 hours.
You got it.
You need to, where's Joe Rogan? You need to go on Joe Rogan. And listen, audience, this guy's information, you need to get on his Substack. Am I saying that right? I got that? Because that's how I get your stuff. And I would assume people are posting to your Substack. Is that how that works on there?
Yeah, you get on. It's a free. My Substack's free, so you can get on it.
Okay. So
mine isn't a paid Substack site. So
my question is, what's your reaction from people? What kind of reactions you get?
My reaction, I've got nothing but positive. I've never had one person refute anything I've said. In fact, from a law enforcement or attorney angle, I've had nothing but positives. I had one defense lawyer tell me this would be hard to refute in a court of law.
Wow. Have you ever been asked to speak in any type of forum anywhere? Wow.
No, really? No. I just write it, put it out there, and hope for the best, Brian.
Wow. John, there's so much, I wanted to kind of touch on the Ukraine corruption, but we can get that on another pod, because you did a hell of a job. And I've learned a lot, audience. I mean, and this gentleman right here, who we were on the same career occupation, but we went a little bit different. We did. Of course, that's in any outfit. You have different specialties, but I'm just in awe of your retention of facts, names. That's just a sign of an unbelievable investigator, and putting it together cold. Unless you're reading the prompter there, John, which you do a better job than the guy in the White House, man.
Everything's coming out of the old noggin.
Do you have any final wrap-up words to say to our audience, my friend? My
final say would be this.
Go ahead.
We're all in this together.
John?
Tell the people they know to get out and vote. This is the only way we end this, is by going out and voting, maximizing each other and getting the information out there. And this is the only way we're going to change this and end this lawlessness. That's how I end it.
Okay, John. And you have a book on Amazon. Did you ever think of that title?
I've got the book on there. God, I can't remember the title.
Okay, that's all right. When did that come out? When did that come out?
2016.
2016, and when stuff was really hot. Well, it's hot now today. But check John out. John Seaman, retired DEA, if anybody knows what that is anymore. Those of us that toiled in really true undercover dark faction. But John, it's been a pleasure so far, and we'll continue to stay in touch. And thank you very much. You have any questions of me?
No, Brian, thank you very, very much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
All right.
Yeah,
all right. Bye-bye.
We'll see you. Bye.